Hi everyone, my name is Melissa van Dijk, and in this video I want to share an updated version of what I've been eating to keep my skin clear. Because over the past 8 months here in Asia, I had to adjust to quite a few things, just based on what I could actually get here. So naturally, some of the foods I used to rely on are either very difficult to find here or simply too expensive. And that kind of forced me to adjust things, which actually led to some interesting changes in how I eat now. Now, before I show you the meals I've been relying on here, breakfast, lunch, dinner, drinks and snacks, I just want to briefly mention this. I still do not use any skincare at all. I've been relying entirely on diet and environmental changes to keep my acne under control. And I'm still tracking everything daily, how I sleep, what I eat, how I feel, digestion and my skin with daily pictures. I've been doing this for over 2 years now without missing a single day. So this isn't based on theory, it's really just based on consistently observing what actually works for me. And just to mention this, because I think this is important, this isn't complicated or time-consuming. Most of the meals I'm going to show you are actually very simple, and that's also why I've been able to stick with it long term. Now, if you've watched my first video, you might remember that I was eating quite a lot of sheep and goat cheese and yogurt. And I know some of you pointed that out, that it was quite a lot. And to be honest, I was completely fine with it. But since then, things have changed. Because here it's either hard to get, too expensive, or both. So I reduced things like cheese and yogurt almost entirely. And the interesting part is, I was eating a lot of it before and it worked completely fine. But then, when I couldn't get it anymore, nothing really changed. So at that point, I kind of realized, okay, it's not causing problems, but it's also not something I actually need. Now I only have it occasionally, for example, when I eat a pizza, or sometimes just to test things. But overall, it's no longer part of my daily routine. And I think that's what made things clearer for me, what's optional and what actually makes a difference. Then I also changed the fats I used. I mentioned this briefly in another video. But I no longer use sunflower seed oil, and instead I use macadamia oil and still butter. So yeah, those are basically the main adjustments I've made. And with that in mind, let's start with breakfast, which has now become the main meal of my day. It's basically the most important meal for me now, because I've noticed that if breakfast is off, especially if it's too sugary or too carb heavy, the rest of the day it just kind of follows that. So I always start with something savory. And one of my main meals is still scrambled eggs, usually 2 to 3 with a pinch of salt, cherry tomatoes and a sometimes peeled cucumber on the side. I often add a piece of real sourdough bread and occasionally a bit of sticky rice or a small banana, so that hasn't really changed much. But one thing that did change is the drink I sometimes have on the side, which is just an iced Nescafe from a small local street stall. It's actually not very sweet, just coffee, shaved ice and 1 or 2 teaspoons of condensed milk. And just quickly, when I say real sourdough bread, I mean actually fermented sourdough. Because the issue you run into is that a lot of what you find today is more like supermarket bread, with added acids and a lot of ingredients, not really properly fermented. So that's just something to be aware of if you want to recreate it. Otherwise you might come back and say it didn't work. And then on other days I'll have chicken tights with the same sides, tomatoes, cucumber, sometimes a bit of a sticky rice. Or I have things like fermented fish stuffed with garlic and rice, or fresh fish, usually steamed with herbs and vegetables, or sometimes grilled in a salt crust, depending on what's available. And when I say fish or chicken, it might sound like more effort, but it's really not. Most of the time it's super basic. Just boiled, steamed or grilled with a bit of salt or some herbs, and that's it. So overall breakfast has become a bit more diverse, but still follows the same idea. And I do snack occasionally, but it's usually something very simple these days. It's basically just a piece of sourdough bread with a bit of butter and a small banana on top. Very simple, but for some reason also really satisfying. It's really something I recommend trying as a snack. But apart from that, breakfast usually keeps me full until lunch. And one thing I noticed, which I think is worth mentioning here, is about the fish. I was used to those packaged smoked fish options before, like mackerel or salmon, and those sometimes made me feel a bit heavy or even slightly dizzy. My partner also had quite a few digestive issues with those smoked versions. So personally, I wouldn't have those too often, especially not daily. Maybe occasionally, that's fine, but not as a regular thing. But the fresh grilled or steamed fish is actually very satisfying. And by the way, before I forget, in between I only drink water. No soft drinks, no juices. I think the last orange or fruit juice I had was about 2 or 3 years ago. That was actually one of the first things I changed, mainly because of the sugar, not even because of my acne, but more because of the calories. I was a bit overweight at the time and I wanted to do something about it. And occasionally I have real filtered coffee, but that's it. Okay, so that was breakfast. Now let's move on to lunch, which has actually changed quite a lot, to be honest. If you've watched my previous video, lunch used to be more structured. Meat with salads, vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, chicory, and so on. But now it's much simpler. I basically rotate the same foods I used for breakfast. So if I had eggs in the morning, I'd have chicken or fish for lunch, or the other way around. Occasionally I add rice, but more often potatoes. I just can't let them go. They still work better for me than rice. I mean, here in Asia, rice is a staple. But for me personally, I still prefer boiled potatoes. Sometimes just with a bit of butter on top. It's simple, but it tastes really good. And then I also eat fruits, which change based on what's in season. Although I'm still quite selective with them. But I have to admit, it's much easier here in the tropics. They're freshly available on every corner all year round, without being shipped all around the world, which just avoids a lot of the storage-related issues. Right now, that's things like pomelo, small bananas, and occasionally mango or pineapple. And in case you're wondering, it's not that I don't eat things like broccoli or cauliflower anymore. They've just become much more rare. Maybe once a week or so. Same with things like grilled or boiled sweet potato or corn. I do eat them occasionally, but they are not something I would have as a staple. Although here it's a bit different. People tend to eat more sweet potatoes than regular potatoes. So that's something you can do as well if you tolerate them well. And lastly, we have dinner, which is very similar again. I just rotate the same foods. Eggs, fish, chicken, depending on what I already had during the day. So in a way, yes, the meals are quite repetitive and very simple. But that's actually the point. Because this consistency is what made everything work so well, especially for my digestion and energy. And for me, that always translates directly into clear skin. Now, occasionally I will have something different, like oats with a bit of milk or water and a small banana. And that's usually when I don't feel like cooking or just want to keep things simple. But I keep that limited, because I've noticed that if I have it too often, like a few days in a row, it can still trigger breakouts, especially on my back and shoulders. And then before I forget to mention, one thing that also changed is that I don't really have cheat days anymore, or what I used to call my Domino's pizza days. Not because I'm restricting myself, but simply because I don't crave those foods as much anymore. Or maybe it's the environment here. I don't know. But the meals I'm eating now just feel much more satisfying. So it's really become more of an occasional thing. Maybe once a month I'll have a pizza, or a burger with french fries, or sometimes some popcorn for a movie night. I mean, let's be honest, if you're sitting in front of the TV watching something intense and you're completely into it, it kind of feels like you need that. So it's kind of a habit, I would say. And I'm not that restrictive where I would say I can never eat those things. And it's also not required to cut them out completely to get your acne under control. It's more that you know it should be the exception, not something you're eating all the time. I mean, it shouldn't become a staple, like movie night every day with popcorn or burgers or chips or whatever. Because once that becomes a regular thing, that's usually when things start to go off. So I guess if there's one clear takeaway from all of this, it's really just to focus on eating real food, simple, mostly self-made meals. Or even when you eat out or ordering frozen foods online, choosing things that are kind of made in that same simple way. This is really the key. Not a lot of ultra-processed stuff, not having a long ingredients list, keeping sugar fairly low, and honestly, even frozen food is completely fine as long as it's just simple ingredients. And then just paying attention to what you personally tolerate well, where your digestion responds well, because that's a very good indication, and not overdoing it. But yeah, I think I'll leave it right here. I hope this gave you a few ideas for meal structures and things you can try out for yourself to help improve your skin. And it actually works pretty well for weight balance too, which is kind of a nice side effect. Now, if you have any questions about specific meals, feel free to ask them in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!